Joining me now, he's one of our favorite guests from ESPN, Yes Network 2, and Ryan Ruocco back on the program on a Wednesday afternoon. Ryan, what's up, man? How are you?
What's up, Spence? How you doing, man?
We're doing okay, you know. I mean, all things considering, it's obviously just been a crazy time for a lot of different reasons, but it's been a few weeks since you and I have been able to catch up. What's the latest with you? You're in content creation just like I am, man. What's the latest with you?
Man, I don't envy what you're having to do, though, on the radio every day. You know what? I'm gearing up a little bit mentally for the convergence of WNBA and NBA on ESPN and Yankees and Nets on Yes all happen at the same time. I certainly am ready to get back calling games, even if it's calling them from a studio. But just, you know, I'm starting to open the valve a little socially in New York, still with some distance and you know, and masks and whatever, but trying to, you know, in New York, we feel good about the response and the place we're in now after going through hell, you know, and trying to sort of have a little bit, you know, just a little more social interaction than we have in the last few months.
So I do want to talk some baseball and some Yankees and some NBA and all that good stuff. But I also, you know, when it comes to what we're seeing in our country societally and the Black Lives Matter movement and the peaceful protests, for the most part, that have taken place across the country, including here in Salt Lake City, you know, I'm just not wired to ignore it when it comes to conversations. Because, Ryan, I think conversations are the only way we move forward, even if they're uncomfortable. And a lot of the conversations are. And, you know, look, I'm well aware that we're two white males chopping this up and talking about it on Sports Talk Radio. But how have you digested the past few weeks when it comes to the reaction of our country to the murder of George Floyd?
You know, I think that I've really tried to do a lot of listening to, you know, a lot of people in my life who are super in tune and educated on issues of racial injustice and social change, and I've tried to heed their advice as far as you know, resources to go to learn more and more. You know, and it's interesting because, you know, you could think, hey, you have a good idea of you know, like, or a good grasp of how you know, how injustice works in this country, and you know, you really still may not have a good enough grasp of the history of it, and it's so important to learn how systems were built in order to learn how they need to be changed. You know, I think I've loved seeing the harmony and unity amongst all people in trying to, you know, right these wrongs or bring our country to a better place. And myself, I've really enjoyed just educating myself even more. And, you know, one of the podcasts that I highly recommend, that I found super educational, that some of my friends turned me on to in the past, and I've re-listened to recently, is Seeing White from Seen On Radio. Fantastic, incredibly educational about the way systems were built, and just trying to, you know, access those resources and listen to my friends and colleagues and hear their experiences. And I think that's also what CC Sabathia and I had a roundtable for our podcast a few weeks ago with 4 of his friends throughout baseball who are all black males, and hearing their experiences. And I think it was just a great way to just hear and learn, you know, kind of a bunch of different, you know, young men who grew up in different parts of the country, yet sort of have some universality in experience, and get to hear their stories and just, you know, become educated with their experiences.
And by the way, we'll send a link out on our socials. It was with CC Sabathia, Prince Fielder, Edwin Jackson, Chris Young, and Cameron Maben. And I listened to it, Ryan, and you were, I mean, I am, I don't want to say envious, but I thought you just handled it so well, because you're the only white guy on the dais, on the round table. And I thought you were respectful, they were respectful, and it was It was very thoughtful. Is there anything specifically, like if you had to pick a couple of different things that you took away from that, what would you say?
First, appreciate that. I mean, I think that, something that Chris Young kept saying that I thought was so interesting is, he kept pointing to the fact of like, hey, like, I don't want people to be worried about saying the wrong thing. And I may be, choosing my own words, but this was the sentiment of what Chris was saying. I don't want people to be worried about saying the wrong thing when we're having these uncomfortable conversations. I want us to understand that, like, what's more important is that we're having these uncomfortable conversations and we can learn from them and get to know each other. And he told a great story, which thank you for listening to the podcast, Spence, and you'll know it, about he had a teammate who, he talked to regularly about a variety of issues. And one time, months down the road, his teammate said something he had no idea was, incredibly racist. And they ended up having a conversation about why it was. And his teammate came back to him and said, you know what, man, like, thank you. Like, I didn't realize that. And of course, this makes perfect sense. And that was sort of one of the examples that, Chris was talking about. And I think even Cameron telling the story of driving home late at night in Detroit from a Yankees Tigers game and knowing he was about to be pulled over, but intentionally he was on a dark highway. It was like 2 a.m. It was a crazy rain delay that night, and they had a day game the next day. So he was speeding, but he was afraid to pull over because there was no lights on this highway. And he kind of like slowly drove to a lit up parking lot before he was comfortable. And that's an athlete in a town where he's played for years, and you think that he might be known, and he still was dealing with that. And I thought that was a very real and tangible example of just how pervasive the issues are and can be.
Last thing on this, Ryan, then we'll move on to some other stuff. But like I said, I just feel like we have to keep talking and not let up and keep going. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you are, so I remember there have been a lot of situations where it feels like a horrific circumstances right in front of us, and then we all commit to being better, and then we are for a little while, and then we go back to whatever it is that plagues us, and for whatever reason, slavery is our founding sin in this country, and we have never been able to find a lane consistently to get out of it. I think we can, but I don't know if this is going to be any different than any of the other times where we've had sentiments and emotions like this. But it does feel a little bit different to me. What are your thoughts on how we can keep going to hopefully make this change last this time?
It's a great question. And I think my answer is tangibly, I don't know. But I know that I'm all in on being a part of that solution. And I think that, to your point about it feeling different this time, is I can't remember this many people being so committed to those changes at the same time and being so affected, and conversations happening, even within my own family, that I can't even remember us ever going into such depth and with such passion and emotion and wanting to see, these kind of changes. And I know they're happening in so many households across our country. And so, I think the key thing for so many of us is just to be willing to listen, to be willing to educate it, and to, it's okay to not have the answers of how that, that change happens or how those steps are taken. I think what's important is for the people who are in position to know and have, who study this and have some really great tangible ideas for how to make true lasting impact that's much needed in this area when it comes to racial injustice and social change. I think it's so important for us to be all ears and then willing to act alongside and try and be a part of that tangible change, even if we don't ourselves know how to actually affect the systems. we have to be willing to listen with an open ears and an open heart to the people that do know how we can change the systems in our country.
Oh, that's well put. The other thing, Ryan, obviously it's going on right now is we're in the middle of an international pandemic still, and the number around 40 million Americans are either outright unemployed or on some sort of unemployment benefits from the government. I bring that up because none of us are in the mood to watch millionaires and billionaires haggle over a mountain of money. And I want to love baseball again. I grew up with Yankee season tickets. I've told you this before. With the old Yankee Stadium, and I want to love the sport that I do enjoy again, but man, do they make it hard. But we are going to get baseball again, Ryan. I want your thoughts on the process that led us up to where we're at today, and then a thought from you on the fact that at least it did end with the fact that we are going to see baseball.
Well, I think there's a couple factors that play with this. Number one, I think in general, social media has made labor negotiations in sports leagues very, very difficult areas to navigate. If you think about it, when you are, I'm just going to use this analogy, when you're baking a cake, if someone comes in just as you start mixing the batter, they don't say like, oh my gosh, where's the cake? It's not done. It's a process, right? And the problem is, with the way social media is, we end up reacting to steps 1, 2, 3, and 9 of a 20-step process.
Yeah.
And I think it makes it harder for progress to be made on both sides when it comes to labor agreements. Because, where you start is never going to be where you finish in a negotiation. And to have, a chorus of people on both sides constantly chiming in and reacting as if, this is a finishing place, I think makes it difficult. I also think, you get people who are very willing to express reactions to those little trinkets of information that spill out. And it's before they may have totally educated themselves on what's going on in a current labor dispute. And then all of a sudden they have to maybe adhere to a public comment they made, even if it's not what they believe after the educational process. And that goes for both sides as well. And so I feel for anyone, honestly, who's trying to publicly come up with an answer to a labor dispute in this social media age. I do think that, at the end of the day, once they're on the field, I think we let that stuff go. I don't think we're going to be thinking about that on July 24th. I just don't. I don't think we're going to be thinking about it throughout the baseball season, because I'm not sure there really was going to be a much different solution if it was handled better. Had they not played, that would have been completely different. But because of the virus, I'm not sure we were ever getting many more than 60 games. So ultimately, I don't think it is so grossly affected, but it certainly is going to set the stage for worry when their labor negotiations come up again in a year. And one thing I always say with this stuff is, you have to remember, like, we pit this as, union versus management, owners versus players, right? But, like, in order for this stuff to work, it has to be looked at as a partnership. It does. And I think the most discouraging thing for the future of this, and the most troublesome aspect for the future of this as it pertains to a future labor agreement between the two parties, is it hasn't felt at all like a partnership. It has felt like an us versus them completely. And even now, that hasn't seemingly been resolved. I don't think it's going to be on our minds during this season, but I think it will be on our minds when all of a sudden the CBA is up.
Now it's time for the selfish question portion of the interview. Give me a couple of Yankee storylines we need to be watching out for. I cannot wait to fire up my TV and watch the boys in pinstripes, man. I'll admit that readily. Give me a couple of Yankee storylines.
Well, first of all, I think we need to see, and this is going to be one on the, not Pollyannic side of things, just where is Aaron Judge at in his recovery? We obviously have not gotten regular health updates because We just haven't had the same kind of access to these athletes. And, last we had heard he was progressing, but was supposed to be getting another scan. So, where exactly is Aaron at in his recovery, and is he full go? I'd say that I feel incredibly confident that Garrett Cole is ready to go. And that is something I feel very good about. I think he's a completely dedicated and committed, just like total horse at the top of the rotation. And he's been very focused on his training even throughout this period of time, which I think it's been hard for some guys. He has seemed to be still locked in, and I think that gives the Yankees an advantage on that front. I think the other aspect of things to watch is just where are the guys at who were on the road to recovery, who seemingly they would be at a point in time where they're ready to go. Are they? James Paxton, Aaron Hicks, Giancarlo Stanton. Are they all at a place where they can be big-time contributing pieces? I think it feels more so with Paxton and Stanton. But even Hicks, now that, we're starting in late July, I'm curious about him and where he'll be at.
We'll end with some NBA stuff, Ryan. Question, simple. Response, probably not so much. But what is your confidence level that we are going to see the league start and then see the league finish where we ultimately crown a champ?
I'm very confident. I really am. And I say this as someone who is ridiculously respectful of the virus and of science. But I believe that the NBA has put together an incredibly well thought out plan that gives them the best possible chance to do this. And I think that because you got to remember, I know everybody's reacting to, seeing different players test positive, but you weren't doing this under the assumption that nobody was going to get the virus, right? Like if that was the only way this was going to work, you never were going to restart again. Yes, that was the impetus for shutting down initially in some respects, right? Once one player, Rudy Gobert, tested positive, we said, we need to get out. But that was before we had any sort of, idea or handle on this at all, And I think that, the idea that, some Suns players test positive or Blazers, whoever it might be, ends up keeping, the league from going through with this, that I don't agree with, because I think they've planned for this. I think they very confidently, I think they pretty much knew they were going to have cases, So then the concern is, well, what about Florida? Florida is having all these rising cases. So you got to remember, you have to treat that NBA bubble as a separate entity entirely, right? Because it's not just like being out and about in a city in Florida. They're going to have very specific tiers for different people who are involved in making this happen. And unless you are part of that, tier one, which the players are a part of, you're not going to have access to be able to, infect a player, or the members of the organization who are also part of that tier one. So, I think the NBA has thought of everything, and I think they will be able to see this through. I think the concern more so could potentially be, well, is there a team who's going to get a star player or two key players who end up getting COVID in a playoff series, and how is that going to change competition? Like, that's a very legitimate concern, but there's just not much you can do about that other than everything you're putting into place. And I think you're just going to have to roll the dice and live with that, because the alternative is not playing at all.
Ryan, you're the man. Always appreciate your time. Keep up the great work on the pod. When you're able to release something, I'm always on it. Try to make sure I'm consuming the content. Stay safe. Be well. We'll catch up soon, okay?
Thank you very much, Spence. I appreciate it. I always enjoy being with you. And we'll have an episode tomorrow afternoon rather than morning. And then we'll have a little bit of an announcement with R2C2 as well. So look forward to that.
Very nice. Will do, man. Be well, okay?
Thanks, dude.